Okay, my first question is regarding, we haven't talked about this in a while, which is kind of refreshing. But just an update on COVID. So obviously we're running outdoors because of this whole thing that actually, when did this start? March? This whole thing kicked off March of this year?
Yeah, I believe it was, yeah.
And so now we're in September, and there is obviously a political pressure because of the election and different things. And in states like California, I've been following two churches. One is John MacArthur's, and then one is Godspeak Calvary Chapel. And they've been going back and forth. John actually, thank goodness, won his lawsuit, or at least they backed down for the time being. But it's been back and forth. So he won that. The restraining order that they put on him and tried to have this whole thing. But then now they're hitting him with these little petty things. And I guess he leases part of his parking lot.
Yeah.
And so they removed the lease so that no one could park to go to church. And it's like this little 4-year-old schoolyard playground bullying tactics that they're doing against him. So you have the church. And then for people that don't know, you posted an article just referencing the death numbers. I believe it was just for Washington State, correct? Mm-hmm. And when you look at that, it's like, I think you did the last 4 years or something like that. The numbers are almost identical, or at least you can't say scientifically that there's any changes.
Right.
And that's a statement.
Yeah.
So being this far into COVID, what do you think as Christians, what are we supposed to be doing with this now?
Well, I think it's the same thing that, I've been saying for the last couple of months. There are people that this is important to pay attention to, as far as their susceptibility to COVID. And so it's obvious when you go through and you look at the stats that people who are older are more susceptible to this. And so, for example, I just did a Bible study not too long ago where I was actually talking about fear and anxiety and talking about people freaking out about COVID-19. And some of the people that are freaking out the most are the youngest. And in our area, in the demographic of 0 to 39, there is a 100% recovery rate from COVID. And, nobody's died. And obviously, when you start getting into older people, when you get above 65 years old or so, there is a higher danger of getting really sick from this. And it's not that other people haven't. I've heard anecdotal situations where people have gotten sick who are in their 40s, for example, and gotten really badly sick. And so it's not something that I just dismiss. But on the other hand, when you're looking at most of the death rates, when you're looking at the demographics for this, it's well over a 99% recovery rate with this. And I didn't go through and compare it with other diseases, but it's getting to the point where it's comparable with the flu as far as recovery rates go. And so, again, I think that there's a need for caution for some people in certain demographics. And so if you're sick and you're older and that kind of thing, I would be very careful. I've got family members that I'm encouraging to be careful about this. But then on the other hand, again, when you're talking about this type of situation, we've never had any kind of pandemic where we've shut down the whole country.
No, not for this.
Yeah, you always quarantine the sick, and you always isolate the people who are vulnerable. And so that's what makes sense. And so the rest of this doesn't make any kind of sense. And frankly, when I look at a lot of the things that the government is doing, whether you're talking about state government or whether you're talking about local stuff too, I'm routinely on web pages looking for information. The information on the websites doesn't match up from one page to the next, and that's as far as direction goes. What is open, what's not open, and that kind of stuff. And specifically, it's in the areas that I'm concerned with, church and that kind of stuff. You don't have a unified basic stance on this whole thing, and so there's some real issues here, and I think that This is being used politically, obviously, and so we're in a democratic state, democratically controlled, or excuse me, I should say Democrat controlled state. And I think it's being used for political expediency. And there's no science behind this. Again, when you're talking about closing schools and that kind of thing, children, the demographic that we're closing up has no danger, well, I can't say no danger because anything's possible, but anything's possible with the flu too.
Yeah.
And again, not comparing it to the flu, but still, you have this with all kinds of other diseases. And
Or
so
any other category that you don't shut down life for.
right,
You don't
exactly.
shut it down for.
And so there are other things going on here, and I don't appreciate politics being entering into the whole health issue. I don't like that, and especially in the context of being a pastor and doing worship and that kind of thing. And so we worship God. We do what Jesus says, and we'll take reasonable precautions. But I'm not going to shut down the church, and I'm not going to shut down my life because a politician wants to exercise power. And so I think at this point that's a lot of what's going on. When you look at the COVID response in other states, there are 7 states that haven't had lockdowns. There is no appreciable difference. In fact, some of the states have had lockdowns have had a harder time with COVID than some of the states that haven't. And so, again, you have these situations that militate against the things that we're being told. And again, I'm somebody who's not, I don't sit here and look at this stuff and say that nobody should be concerned with it. There are people who should be concerned with it. I just don't think it's the whole population. Yeah. So.
All right. There's a lot more we could talk about, but we
Yeah.
have stuff on here backing up, and so I'm going to move on.